Welcome to the Long-Term Investor. Today I'm joined by psychologist and New York Times bestselling author, Dr. Daniel Crosby. Daniel, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Peter, great to be with you, man.
I know we had a conversation not that long ago for your podcast, the Standard Deviations podcast, which I highly recommend to people who are not just interested in behavioral science, but in all sorts of different financial conversations. And you asked me some nice cardinal questions. I think that's always been a common thread between you and I. And we're recording today on April 27th. I know that this episode is going to air on May 11th. So before we jump into the good financial stuff, the good behavioral stuff, I got a few questions, see how we can do with predictions. What is that? Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, let's go.
In 2 weeks, who will be the Cardinals starting shortstop?
The Cardinals starting shortstop will be Edmundo Sosa in 2 weeks. DeYoung will be a distant memory.
Yes, I'm in that same camp. I actually am hoping it's going to be Tommy Edman, which means that we call up a prospect to play second. But
Gorman's called up then, and Tommy Edman's the shortstop. Yeah,
that's my hope, but I think you're more likely correct.
I would prefer your scenario for sure.
And who do you think is going to be our leadoff hitter 2 weeks from now?
I think it's still going to be Dylan Carlson. I'm afraid it's still going to be Dylan Carlson. I really like him. I want him to turn it around a little bit. And between DeYoung and Sosa, I saw this morning they have a 50% strikeout rate. So we got to do better, man. We got to do better.
Well, if Carlson is clicking, the lineup is scary. If he is not, I wonder if we give Goldschmidt a try at leadoff at some point. But the team's pretty good. And I know people want to hear you talk about behavioral finance. So I'll only ask you one other question. How many wins do you think the Cardinals are going to have this year?
90.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah, 90. This is a 90-win team.
Yeah, if we trade for like a front-end rotation guy, maybe we're like 92, 93, 94.
We will not trade for a front-end rotation guy. We are cheap in Midwestern. We will stand pat with the guys we have and be mediocre.
I'm usually in that headset. I'm hopeful that we're good enough that the team gets invested in at the deadline or earlier. But I know that's not why people log in to hear us. I know all my St. Louis friends will enjoy that little bit of banter. But kind of giving some background on why we both decided to come on each other's podcast was a shared friend of ours, Emily Binder, had asked a question on Twitter, and you rephrased it a little to focus more on investing. It's just a simple question of what do most people misunderstand about investing?
I thought her question was fantastic. And I think the biggest thing that I would say is that they confuse externalities and internalities, if we will. So when most people are looking for the drivers of investment returns, they're going to look at things like what's happening in Ukraine, what's the Fed going to do, what's the economy going to do, and they're going to ignore all of the things that are in their control. They're going to focus on all the things that are outside of their control. They're going to focus on all the things that are candidly unforecastable. They're going to, as a result, feel very helpless, and they're leaving aside their true power, which is that in every generation and in every long-term time frame we can look at, the best predictor of investment outcomes, the best predictor of financial outcomes is your adherence to a couple of very basic, unsexy principles, like keeping your fees in order, making sure you're contributing every couple of weeks, staying the course, remaining long-term, and controlling the controllable. So whenever people learn that I work in the industry, they ask me to try and forecast these things that are coming around the bend, which of course I have no idea. And then they ignore the things that are in their power. So I think that's the thing they most get wrong.
What's interesting is that investor behavior totally within our control, and yet we see time and again that you can't necessarily do it alone, or you can. It just the end product or the end result, the end outcome, and the journey along the way may not be quite as good. Do you have any sort of insights into why that might be?
What we're talking about at its core is behavior change, and behavior change is really, really tough. And everything that we need to do to get our financial house in order runs contrary to our wiring, right? So it requires us to take on risk. It requires us to take on uncertainty, to think in the long term. And all of our wiring is for immediacy, for immediate pleasure, immediate certainty, and everything we're asked to do, both as savers and investors, it runs 180 degrees contrary to sort of our natural wiring. And this is why working with a financial advisor is so impactful and so important. If you look at something like people's biggest intention to change behavior is usually around New Year's resolutions. And depending on who you ask, anywhere from about 81% of those to somewhere in the 91% range fail every year. And why is that? It's because we don't approach that behavior change holistically. I have these 3 E's that I've come up with that I think it takes to change a financial behavior. The first of these is education. We need to know how markets work. We need to know how personal finance works. Education is sort of the foundational layer. The second thing we need is the right environment. You need a portfolio that is tailored to your risk preferences and your risk style so that you can stay the course. Easier said than done. And then the last thing that we need is encouragement. We need the help of a third party, that outside voice. So even when we know the right thing to do, we're in a great portfolio, there's still going to come times in the lives of every investor where they're tested and they're going to need someone to hold their hand, to keep them invested and to help them make the right decision at a critical juncture. And so if you're not being thoughtful about all 3 of these things, if you're not educating yourself, if you're not being thoughtful about the environment and have someone in your corner, I think the odds of you doing the right thing when you're wired to do the very wrong thing are very low.
Yeah, and we see physiologically that our bodies react very differently when we're stressed or emotional, something that you've covered in great detail. And there's a lot of research that shows that when people have help versus not, whether it's Morningstar or Vanguard or Dalbar has one where people don't love the numbers, but the point is somewhat the same. And there are more nuanced studies, smaller, less holistic. But I think the other thing as an advisor myself is that once people do enlist help, sometimes they're shocked at the simplicity of the advice being given. They feel like it has to be more complex. And you give a wonderful example in your book, The Laws of Wealth, kind of at the outfront about guinea worms. And Daniel, first of all, I have to know, because I read through all my Kindle notes before this for the different books of yours, and I have, how did he come up with this? Is the note I have highlighted next to guinea worms. So first of all, tell me, where in the world did you even learn about these guinea worms? And then secondly, can you tell our listeners the background of that and sort of how it applies to the way that we make decisions and plan for retirement?
Yeah, that's including that example grosses more people out. I swear that's the only thing people remember about that book. Now, I read about it in another book on persuasion, actually, I think. And they were talking about, I'm a big student of persuasion and influence because I think that is sort of the ultimate tool in the advisor's toolkit is, ultimately, we're not just trying to give advice in a way that sticks and is adhered to. So the study on guinea worms was really fascinating. And, part of the reason it appealed to me is because a lot of the major players were from here in Atlanta, where I live. And what happened was that the philanthropic legacy of former President Jimmy Carter, right? One of the things that he's tried to do, in addition to Habitat for Humanity, is work on these sort of large-scale public health crises. And one of these was taking place in Africa, and it was these guinea worms were decimating local economies, right? So people would become infected and they weren't able to work and they spread very rapidly. And so what happens was basically, it's lunchtime, so I'll try not to get too deep into it. But basically, they enter through your foot, and then the only way that you can get relief is by putting your foot in water. Well, a lot of these places have shared sort of communal watering holes. And so these folks who are infected run to get some personal relief and then end up infecting everybody at this communal water source. And so what the Carter Center and the CDC did was they taught people 2 simple behaviors, right? They basically taught them early warning signs, early recognition signs, and then sort of quarantine behaviors on top of that, and enlisted the collective to enforce these 2 behaviors. And so it was the first time in human history where we have eradicated a disease for which there is no cure. Through simple behavioral interventions, there's no pill, there's no shot, there's still nothing you can do to cure guinea worms. And yet there were less than 100 cases of guinea worms, down from millions, by simply following these 2 behaviors. And the same is true of financial misbehavior, right? There's never going to be a pill or a potion or a perfectly weighted fund that's going to keep us from doing stupid things. But my thought is, if we can learn just, a handful or 2 handfuls of good behaviors, we can keep ourselves on a good path.
Well, and you mentioned it somewhat in the onset of when you were talking about what people misunderstand about investing is that investor behavior is a better predictor of wealth creation than picking the right fund or timing when to get in and out of a specific investment. And a lot of times investment opportunities and threats excite us, both in a good and bad way. Maybe on the upside, when people get more greedy, it's Bitcoin, it's IPOs, it's any given individual stock. Or on the fear side, we get negatively excited when stocks are going down. Why is it that we as a species get excited by our money, by our investments?
It's a great question. So when writing The Behavioral Investor, there were a lot of fMRI studies I looked at. So these are like brain scan studies. And they hook people up to these brain scans, if you will, and they measure the amount of electrical activity in the brain when showing people different excitatory stimuli. So think about stuff like pictures of death, even pictures that are sexual in nature, like all these things that would sort of, get people's minds spinning. And what they found is that money had more excitatory power than sort of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, right? Like all these things that we think would kind of get us excited. Money had the most excitatory power of all, which then, of course, means that our ability to sort of get sideways with money or get our judgment clouded is proportionally dramatic as well. So why do we get excited about it? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one is just evolutionary, right? I mean, money is the means by which we secure the sort of fundamental safety needs that we all have from just an evolutionary standpoint. But then if you sort of move up Maslow's hierarchy, it's also the way that we sort of keep score and value each other. It's not as it should be. But the fact remains that if you're talking about everything from covering the basic fundaments of securing life, money is involved. If you talk about things like mate selection, to use a very sort of formal word for, finding a partner, money is dramatically influential there, all the way to things like love and belonging and our own perceptions of self-worth. Money touches every rung on Maslow's hierarchy. So everything from meeting the basic needs of life to measuring our own self-esteem, for better or worse, money's implicated. And so accordingly, it has a ton of excitatory power, and our ability to sort of get goofy with money or to become sort of overwhelmed by our stress or our fear or our greed is very great.
Well, and you had mentioned that we're not hardwired for these sorts of decisions. And, I don't know what exactly the years are, but a couple 100,000 years that we've had the same brains that we have today. And the scientific revolution was only, 400 or 500 years ago. And so now we have all this data and we're still reacting like we're running through the jungle as opposed to making calm, rational decisions. And you'd mentioned, and this is throughout The Behavioral Investor with brain scans and a lot of studies on the actual body science of how we react when we're stressed or feeling emotional. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I covered this in depth in The Behavioral Investor. I just thought it was a gap in the behavioral investing literature. If you look at something as simple as being hungry, which is something we experience with some regularity or missing sleep, these things have a profound impact on the way that we make decisions, right? And so there's this famous study out of Israel that looks at basically the leniency or the severity of different judgments handed down by Israeli judges. And it's highly correlated with how recently they've had a snack. And it's pretty incredible to think that some of the smartest people in one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, right? The top 2% of intelligentsia in one of the most modern countries in the world. If you ask these judges, why did you give this person 5 years and give this person 25 years? They would undoubtedly cite some sort of historical precedent or some sort of jurisprudence. But the research shows that it's like how recently they've had some almonds, right? We do this in our own lives too. We sort of move through the world unaware of how small decisions, right? Like having gotten adequate sleep or having gotten adequate exercise or appropriate or intake or lack thereof of things like, caffeine or alcohol, all of these things impact our decision making in almost imperceptible ways. And we think we have both hands, right? We think we have our hands on at 10 and 2 on sort of this, the good ship of self-control. And what all the studies I found in The Behavioral Investor found is that environmental considerations are much more powerful than we assume. I honestly don't remember which one, but in one of my books, I talked about this, and they found things like in liquor stores, they could dramatically shift the purchase of one type of alcohol over another with just the music that was playing over the PA. So on weeks when they would play French music, the sales of champagne would rise like 75%. On weeks when they would play German music, the sales of German beer would rise like over 50%. And again, when you're asking someone who's walking out of the liquor store with a case of German beer, like, hey, why did you buy this? They're going to say, oh, well, I wanted a beer. Like, I just sounded good. They're not going to say that they were subtly influenced by environmental cues. And so this is one of these instances where I think we have to be so thoughtful with the way that we treat our bodies, with the messages we surround ourselves with, because they're so impactful on the way we make choices.
You said you weren't sure what book that came from. If I remember, is that from You're Not That Great? That strikes me as one of the examples from there, because you're talking about like we're such an overconfident bunch, us humans.
Yeah.
And we developed that way. I'm not sure. I think You're Not That Great's one of the last books I read of yours, even though I think it was one of the first that came out. In part because you were giving it away for free one day, or as $1 or something like that. But some of those themes play out throughout all of your work in sort of pointing out that, hey, we're naturally overconfident. Maybe you could explain a little of why it is we're so overconfident and how that impacts the way that we invest.
One of the themes that runs through all of my writing, I think, and it's just something I believe deeply, is that things that serve us well in one context tend not to serve us well in a financial or an investment context. So you look at something like overconfidence. If you've met me and you've met my wife, you know that it was overconfident of me to go speak to my wife and presume that she would ever want to speak to me in return. But look, I'm glad I did it, right? If you think about starting a business or being a financial advisor or starting a restaurant, all of these things are wildly overconfident. In a place where 90% of restaurants fail in the first 3 years, every single restaurateur who starts a restaurant business is, statistically speaking, doing something dumb. And yet we're glad that people are overconfident in those respects, because it leads us to take risks that have a positive cumulative effect on society. And it helps us get out of bed in the morning. If we saw ourselves the way that others see us, I think it would be a bit of a bummer. And so overconfidence, people who are overconfident are happier, they're more successful entrepreneurs. Like, there's all kinds of positive things that come out of overconfidence. The place where we get in trouble, though, is when we take that overconfidence that serves us well, perhaps on the dating scene, or if you're running for political office or whatever, and we take that and apply it to our financial life, and we think that the same risks don't apply to us that apply elsewhere. And there's actually a couple of kinds of overconfidence. When most people think about overconfidence, it's like, oh, Peter thinks he's a better driver than Daniel. And like, that's one form of overconfidence, just thinking like head to head, I'm better at X than this person. But we also think that we are more prescient about the future than we actually are. And we also think we're luckier than we are. When you ask people to rate the likelihood of, getting cancer or getting divorced, people systematically underrate the probability of these things, like really dramatically. Like, no one thinks they're the one that's going to get sick. No one thinks that they're the one that's going to get divorced. And so we don't take care of our bodies. We don't do what we should in our marriages. But yet, if you ask people, how likely are you to win the lottery or to become a professional baseball player, or 100 other positive things, they dramatically overrate the odds of those things. So overconfidence is everything from thinking we know more about the future than we actually do, to thinking we're better than the next person, to thinking that we're less prone to risk than other people. And I think it's pretty easy to see how that confluence of things can make us really bad choices with our money.
And I feel like I watch that play out all the time, where people are just naturally overconfident in their abilities. And probably that's because we're working with a lot of very successful people who are very good at what they do. And they often translate that to all areas of life. I would argue that I'm good at my job, but not very good at anything else. I've learned from experience. But when you work with someone who's wildly successful, and you mentioned like we're, as a species, we'll apply rules that work in one area incorrectly to another area. And so just their own trust in their own gut and their own confidence in knowing holistically everything, which is very difficult to identify those blind spots. And that's sort of the role that as an advisor, if we're looking there and listening like a therapist to help identify those blind spots, to help keep people honest. It doesn't just work with overconfidence, but it also works with people who are maybe more loss averse. The common thing that us in the profession throw around is that the pain of losses hurt twice as much as the pleasure of gains, right? And people don't like to make a lot of change. So if it's different, we get that fear reaction going on. How do you feel like that can play out with individuals, and how can they do things to address that conservatism that they face?
It's a great example. I think one of the most brilliant sort of business applications of a deep understanding of loss aversion happened during the great financial crisis. So during the GFC, everyone was scared of losing their job. Everyone was scared of pay cuts. And so big purchases really dried up. People are not going out and buying cars and houses when they think that their job's on the line at any day. And so Hyundai did this really neat thing that showed a deep understanding of sort of excessive conservatism and loss aversion, which is they said, look, if you buy a Hyundai, like if you buy a new Hyundai and you lose your job, we will refund you. No questions asked, right? Like you can undo this transaction within however many months it was. And so people, when you took sort of the worst case scenario off the table, people were then able to move forward. So they said, hey, I do need a new car. I hope I don't lose my job. But if I do, I can unwind this transaction. And so they sold like 4 times as many cars as their next biggest competitor for a period of time during the financial crisis. And so we as advisors and we as professionals can do something like this by taking advantage of this mental framework called mental accounting. So as a form of simplification, people tend to bucket their money. And because they do this, we know that money's fungible, right? Like the same money that I could use to go buy a Snickers bar, I could also apply towards a ticket to a Cardinals game, right? Like we know that money can go any old place it wants to, but we don't treat it that way. We put these labels on it, and because we label it one way or another, we tend to invest and spend and save it differently. So one of the things that we can do is just help people segment their financial lives mentally so that we say, hey, look, the average bear market is, however, 2 years long or something, and say, look, you've got 2 years of safety right here so that next time things hit the fan, you can go, okay, I'm covered. It's kind of like that Hyundai example. And so there's little things we can do, everything from, of course, having people in the appropriately conservative risk-reward framework to really sort of carving out and segmenting a piece of their assets to say, these are earmarked for safety. Like these are earmarked for a rainy day. So that's covered and it's coming. Right? We can even inoculate people against this somewhat because, we know the stat that gets thrown around all the time because it's a great one. The average intra-year drawdown over the last 30 years is like 16.5%. And yet every time there's a 10 or 15% dip in the market like there is now, we have people acting like it's never happened before when it happens as regularly as your birthday. So I think everything from educating people to creating specific carve-outs for felt safety are ways that advisors can help people overcome this loss aversion.
I couldn't agree more. The education piece up front dramatically changes expectations. It's sort of like why when you're driving on the road and you see a sign that says bump, your car isn't going to brake when you go over the bump. But if you panic when you go over the bump and swerve, suddenly you have a problem. And I do think the market loss one is something that's pretty common. We talk about it all the time. When markets are up, we talk about it. When markets are down, we talk about it. Hey, losing 10 to 15%, that's pretty normal. No need to panic. Here's what we're going to do when that happens. The thing is with financial headlines, they do seem to find their way into mainstream at certain points. And I think inflation's a really good example where my mom reads The Skim, one of those kind of summary emails. And as a result, if the market's down big, that's going to be in The Skim. Whereas it normally isn't. Sure, it's going to be in the Wall Street Journal every day. That's to be expected. But when you see something like 8% inflation and you don't really understand the details, you might forget that, hey, even with inflation what it is today, it's still only averaged 2.5% over the last 5 years. People are just focused on what's in front of them in that very moment. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective with all of the stimuli that come from our phones, from our papers, from our friends. With behavioral economics, with behavioral finance, it's really easy to point out all the errors people make, but it's also, there's less literature focused on what to actually do about it. So in terms of helping people with their attention and what to focus on, what kind of actionable guidance can you give for people dealing with what is reality today and how we receive information?
I was trained as a clinical psychologist originally. My PhD is in clinical psychology, and then I found myself into the world of finance for most of my professional life. But I actually entered the industry with a desire to work with folks with eating disorders. That was really what got me into psychology. And so I worked at an inpatient treatment center for women with eating disorders for a time. And it surprises people that one of the first things we did with folks when they would come to this center is that we would educate them on proper media consumption. And so in specific, we would educate them around the ways in which Hollywood and the popular media contort and torture women's images to sell stuff, right? I mean, to make women feel insecure about their bodies, to sell makeup or Spanx or whatever. And so one of the things that we would help these women do is become thoughtful, informed consumers of media. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to do in the industry as well, to say that, these financial news outlets that are reporting on every, sort of histrionic negative thing that's out there, they're not doing that for your benefit, right? They're doing that because that sort of hysteria sells newspapers and sells digital ads, right? And so I think when you help people understand what's behind this, that's one piece of it. I tell a story in one of my books. I was on a cable financial news network that will remain unnamed. And they basically, when they were counting me down, right, they have the little headphones on, the little earpiece in, and they're counting me down. And they were basically like, hey, don't be a nerd. You know what I mean? To be fair, I had like elbow patches on and tortoiseshell glasses, and I do look very dorky. And so, but they were effectively like, hey, like, give us something good. The message was not, hey, be thoughtful and diplomatic and well-reasoned and evidence-based. It was like, hey, like, give us something good. And that's how the sausage gets made in media. So I think when we understand that, that's powerful. And then honestly, we have to be historians, like you talked about. We have to have some context and know market history. But even more than that is to just be thoughtful about what we take in the first place. Because again, even if we know, right, even if we know these stats that, look, we have a bear market every 4 or 5 years on average, we have a correction every year on average, every 16 months, I think it is. Even if we know these things intellectually, it can be hard to talk ourselves out of it. And so the most powerful thing we can do is just be thoughtful about how we allocate our attention and make sure that we're allocating that attention to the appropriate places.
And you mentioned starting out as a clinical psychologist. Is there anything throughout your career, both in that point or as you transitioned into more of a finance focus, is there anything about human behavior that you feel like you've really changed your mind about in recent years?
It's kind of depressing, but I feel like my belief in free will has been eroded significantly. I feel like, I know it's not like fun to say, but I do feel like our buttons can get pressed more easily than we would like. And so I think it's a call to surround ourselves with the right people, to sort of stand in the right places. I'm a big true crime fan, not proud to admit that, but I am like a ravenous consumer of true crime podcasts. And I think one of the things that is true when you look at people who have done really shocking things in some cases is that a lot of times they're just regular folks who found themselves in sort of an extraordinary circumstance. And so I think the more that we can, everything from the messages we put in our head to the things we put in our body to the people we surround ourselves in the places we find ourselves, I think are a much better predictor of how your life turns out than your desire, because everyone desires the same things, right? Everybody wants to be a good person. Like everybody wants to be successful and rich and all the other things, but we're usually about as good or as bad as the things we put in our head and the people we surround ourselves with. So yeah, I'm afraid we have We have less free will than I originally thought, but I think it's less of a bummer when you realize there's something you can do about
Yeah, I
it.
appreciate you not fully bumming me out before we go. It's really difficult to talk and narrow the conversation with someone like yourself who has a wealth of knowledge. And I really encourage anyone who's listening who has not read any of Daniel's books to please go and check those out. And I'll definitely link to them in the show notes at thelongterminvestor.com. Daniel, you're also quite well read. I was curious if there were books for people to learn more, if they're interested in this conversation or the topic of money, behavioral or otherwise. Maybe you could give us a few book recommendations.
Yeah, there's a lot, right? So if you think about sort of, we'll call it enoughism, right? Like this is one of the things we're always up against. I think Brian Portnoy's book, The Geometry of Wealth, is a great book to think about just sort of this concept of enough. One of the things we know from the behavioral literature is that we move the goalposts a lot. And so that, what may have seemed like success to us 6 months or 6 years ago doesn't feel like success when we get there. So I think his book does a great job of contextualizing that. I think Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money, is an excellent sort of primer on some of the things that we've talked about today. I think there's, if you're really interested in sort of the biopsychosocial pieces of this, there's a book called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf that talks about interesting studies done on traders and things like testosterone levels and some of the different sort of physiological things that are super interesting. And then I think we didn't get into this, but there's a ton of evidence that women outperform men for a host of behavioral reasons. And so there's a book called, I think I'm going to get the title right. It's like Warren Buffett Invests Like a Girl, Then You Should Too, by Lou Ann Lofton. That is a really fascinating look at some of the reasons why women are sort of the ultimate behavioral investors. So those are just a couple off the top of my head. Oh, and then read Man's Search for Meaning, because it's the best book ever written.
Okay. That's a heavy endorsement. Well, I like that. I have read many, but not all of those. So I'll be sure to check a couple of those out. And for all of you listening, we'll link to those in the show notes as well. Daniel, before you go, just got one more question for you that I ask everybody. What does it mean to you to be a long-term investor?
Being a long-term investor is about putting first things first. So my dad is an advisor and a great dad as well. And one of the things that he always does is sort of say, son, are you putting first things first? And so I think living a life where you just focus on what matters, which is family and baseball and 100 other things besides markets. There's this concept in behavioral psychology called a substitution behavior, right? And so instead of just trying to cold turkey a behavior, we put something new in its place that's more vivid and more worthwhile. And so I think almost everyone, the time that they spend worrying about markets and about their portfolio would be better spent learning a new hobby and increasing your professional skills, deepening your network, playing catch with your kid, or going to a baseball game. So I think, putting first things first and putting money where it belongs, which is, it's important, but it's not the most important thing, is a great way to be long-term in your focus.
I love it. Daniel, where can people find you if they want to learn more?
My podcast, Standard Deviations, I'd be honored if you'd go check it out. I'm on Twitter at Daniel Crosby and on LinkedIn, Daniel Crosby, PhD.
You certainly on social media share a lot of stuff that makes me pause and think and is enlightening. So I definitely would encourage people to go do that. Thanks so much again for joining us. And for those of us watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. That helps more people find the videos, and make sure that you won't miss another one of the great guests we have coming up. And until next time, thanks everybody.